Hello again. Fancy meeting you here, not on Zoom. Last we left off in Where the Mountain Meets the Moon, Min Lee was looking for the king and she was told he would be at the market. She gave a peach to an old man who was begging for food because he didn't have any. Let's rewind a little bit and remind ourselves what was going on. The peach was so delicious, the man said. I wish for all of you to be able to taste it. If you would humor an old man and stay a little while, I'll share my good fortune. The old man took a small stick out of his back pocket and bent down. In the dirt next to the black bricks, he dug a small hole and planted his peach pit. He stuck his stick upright in the little mound and then asked for water. Min Lee, now completely fascinated, took out her water jug and handed it to him. As he poured water onto his stick, it trembled, and was she imagining it? It seemed to grow. And it was growing. The stick grew higher and higher and thicker until it was the width of Min Lee's arm. When she could no longer see the top of it, pink flowers and branches began to blossom out of it. As the sweet scent of the flowers filled the air, Min Lee realized the stick had become a peach tree. The crowd of people seemed to realize this too, as they all gaped at it open-mouthed. Even the stingy vendor left his fruit stand to stare at it in awe. Like pink snow, the petals fell from the tree and made a soft carpet in the dirt. Green leaves sprouted, and as they cascaded over the branches, pale, moon-colored balls like pearls developed. Almost as if they were small balloons being blown with air, they grew into round fruit, blushing pink and red as they developed. Soon the tree was heavy with them, and the air was full of the enchanting smell of ripe peaches. Children gathered around and stared longingly at the luscious fruit, while the adults gulped with their mouths watering. Finally, the old man reached up, plucked a peach from the tree, and handed it to one of the people in the crowd. Please, he said, waving his hand, help yourself. The crowd needed no other urging. Young children climbed the tree and passed down the fruit, while the taller adults simply stretched and grabbed. A boy with a tired horse climbed onto its back to reach an especially red peach that called his name. Before long, everyone's mouths were full of soft, sweet peaches and groans of delight. Even the peach vendor, who forgot about his stand, stood under the tree with his eyes closed contently and peach juice dribbling out of his mouth. Min Lee, however, didn't join in the feast of peaches. If I hadn't been eating peaches all the way to the city, Min Lee said to herself, I'd be the first one climbing the tree. But as she was slightly tired of peaches, Min Lee saw what no one else did. She noticed that every time someone plucked a peach from the tree, a peach from the fruit stand disappeared. The beggar is using the vendor's peaches for his tree. Min Lee laughed to herself as she glanced at him through the fruit-eating crowd. He was watching with an amused look, and suddenly Min Lee saw that the beggar wasn't really that old at all. He must be a magician. Maybe he can help me get into the inner city. Min Lee moved toward him. As she weaved her way to him, the last peach was picked from the tree, and the leaves and branches began to disappear. The tree trunk seemed to shrivel into itself, and it grew thinner and shorter. The crowd had finished their peaches, and the ground was littered with peach pits. When Min Lee finally reached the beggar, the tiny twig of the tree vanished underneath the pile of peach pits, and the beggar was turning to leave. Wait, Min Lee said and grabbed his arm. However, as Min Lee took hold of his sleeve, it pulled back and a glint of gold shone. Quickly, the beggar pushed back his sleeve, but the quick glance was enough for Min Lee to see that he wore a gold bracelet in the shape of a dragon. They stared at each other as Min Lee's quick-thinking mind somersaulted. Only the imperial family is allowed to use the image of a dragon, Dragon had said. Everyone knows a golden dragon is always and only worn by kings, said the buffalo boy. The words flashed in her mind and Min Li could barely breathe. You're wearing a dragon, Min Li gasped. Only the is allowed to wear a golden dragon. You must be. Where's that beggar? A loud, angry shout cut through the chaos. Min Li recognized the vendor's voice. He stole my peaches! I'll get him! Quickly, the beggar shook off Min Li from his arm and began to run. She stared in shock when she finished her sentence. You must be, Min Li whispered to the ragged, disappearing figure. The king. What do you think is going to happen? We've got time for one more chapter. Chapter 22. Min Li shook herself from her shock. The king, Min Li said. I can't lose him now. And in a panic, she began to run after the tattered figure. And it was quite a chase, or it would have been if the beggar had realized he was being followed. He wove in and out around people and bins of rice, each step taking them closer to the unused areas of the city. Behind a pile of discarded baskets, Min Li thought she had lost him, but luckily the gray sleeve of his loose jacket waved at her, and she saw him round the walled corner of the inner city. As an abandoned wagon hid her from his view, she saw him push against a portion of the wall. With a slow groan, the wall moved. It's a secret door to the inner city, Min Li gasped, and she was able to reach it just before it closed completely. With both hands, she pressed hard against it, and the door pushed open. And like the lid of a jewelry box, the door opened into a landscape of bright colors. The bamboo, pine, and plum leaves seemed to shine in the sun as if carved from emeralds, and the accents of the pink and red flowers were like nestled rubies. Steps away from her feet, Min Li could see a patterned pathway made of water-worn pebbles. The central jade green lake mirrored the arcing tiled roofs of the pavilions and the rough beauty of large weathered rock sculptures. A winding covered walkway lifted up from the cloudy water like a flower. It could only be the palace garden. But Min Li barely noticed this. Instead, she stood with large eyes staring at the figure in front of her. The beggar was wiping his face with a delicate white cloth, and Min Li saw again that he was not an old man at all. In fact, he was younger than Ba. The gray of his hair was wiped away with the cloth as well, and his beard and head were as glossy black as Min Li's. His gray rags had been cast off in a pile next to him, and he was clothed in a bright yellow silk, the color of the sun. Intricate dragons and multicolored clouds that matched the designs of the gold bracelet he wore were embroidered on his robes and glittered in the light. There was no doubt now that he was the king. Then the king turned around and saw her. At this glance, Min Li shrank to the ground in a humble bow. Your Majesty, Min Li breathed, and her knees could feel the thumping of her heart in her chest. Caught, Min Li heard him say, and she peeked up to see the king looking at her with the same amused expression he'd had as a beggar watching the people eat the peaches. He shook his head at her. With his eyes twinkling at her, he could have been the young father of one of her village friends. And by you, he said, my little benefactor, I knew you were a clever one. Your Majesty, Your Majesty! A chorus of voices came through the air toward them, and Min Li could see a parade of servants in the distance running across the zigzag bridge. Well, you mustn't be caught by them, the king said to Min Li. Then they would find out all about my little adventures, and then where will I be? And he pulled Min Li up to her feet and pushed her behind one of the giant gnarled stone carvings, kicking his rags over her. Quick, quick, he said, and don't say a word. I command you not to say a word, or to come out until I say so. Min Li clutched the rough stone and made herself as small as possible. Hundreds of footsteps were approaching, like falling rain from a thunderstorm. "What is this?" the king demanded. "Has war been declared on the city?" "Your Majesty," an out of breath voice said, "we have been searching for you." "Searching for me?" the king said. "I've been here in the garden for hours." We must have missed you," the voice stuttered. "None could find you. The guards had not seen you, and we feared—" "You feared the king of the city of bright moonlight had been spirited away?" The king laughed. "Not this time, Counselor Chu. However, I do feel the wish to commune with the moon tonight." "Your Majesty?" the voice said. "Yes," the king said decisively. "Tonight I wish to be alone in the garden with the moon. Have a meal brought to me in the clasping the moon pavilion, and do not disturb me until morning." "Yes, Your Majesty," the voice said, and Min Li couldn't help but peek out. She saw rows and rows of finely dressed people kneeling with their heads on the ground in front of the king. Their rich silk clothing shimmered in the fading sunlight. One man, dressed in black, kneeled closer to the king, separate from the rest of the men. Min Li guessed he was Counselor Chu. "Actually, bring me 2 meals, the king said, and he glanced toward Min Li. She caught his eye and quickly shrank back out of sight. "2 meals, Your Majesty?" Counselor Chu asked with just the faintest question in his voice. "Yes, 2 meals, the king said. "I shall honor the spirit of the moon with her own meal, since she will be keeping me company. It's only fair." "Yes, Your Majesty," the counselor said. Min Li could only guess how confused he was, but he was well trained enough to keep it out of his voice. "In an hour's time," the king said, "I shall be at the Clasping the Moon Pavilion. I want the food waiting for me and nothing else. I do not wish to be disturbed by anyone this evening." "Yes, Your Majesty," the voice said again, and Min Li could hear the shuffling and swishing of silk as the group rose and took leave of the king. "They've gone," the king said in a low voice. "You can come out now." Min Li crawled out from behind the sculpture. "Well, my little friend," he said to her, "now that you know who I am, come walk with me and tell me who you are." She did it. She got to meet the king. Oh my gosh, I can't wait to hear what their conversation is going to be. We'll have to find out tomorrow. Right now, check the agenda for what you should be doing. You will have a few options of things that you would like to do to share today. All right, check the agenda. See you back at 12:10.